Hi, welcome to Time Out for Humanity, a podcast that invites you to take time off for your physical and mental health. Every episode, we speak with an expert to show you how. Welcome to Time Out for Humanity. Today's guest is Thomas Campbell. Thomas Campbell is a former NASA physicist. His expertise is in simulations and large, complex systems. He is also a consciousness explorer who teaches people how to meditate, grow up, and become love. His groundbreaking research unifies physics and metaphysics, mind and matter, the normal and the paranormal. Recently, he designed a set of physics experiments that would revolutionize our understanding of reality. The design was published in a peer-reviewed journal of quantum mechanics. His book, My Big Toe, has been translated into several languages. His YouTube videos have inspired millions to live wisely and courageously. To work with Tom directly or learn more about his latest creation, Tom's Park, a virtual imaginality game, check out the links within the description. Hey, Tom.
Hi, Andy.
How are you doing?
Good to be back. I'm doing fine. How are you doing?
We're good. And we also, of course, has Nathan with us today.
Mm-hmm.
Hi, Nathan.
Hello, Nathan.
Hey, Andy. Hi, Tom. Good to be here.
So I think we're going to start off with a series of questions from our Discord group again, just like last time. Mm-hmm. So are you ready, Tom?
I'm ready. Yes,
Great.
This time you sent me the questions ahead of time, so I actually had a chance to look at them. Usually that's not the case. We just, kind of wing it as we go. So we'll see if this is any different.
Yes, just like the way you like to do things, right? Test out the A and B's, the different versions. So Nathan, you want to go ahead?
Sure. Let's jump right in. We're going to really combine the first and second questions with just the first one here from Anonymous. I'm wondering if Tom has any insight into what is currently happening in Eastern Europe now. Are there responses from a number of countries, such as sanctions towards Russia, what would be considered a low entropy choice? Are there better options from a big picture view? Thanks for the chance to pose a question. Hope it's timely.
Well, it's very timely. And yes, I do have a bigger picture view. Of course, the bad news is we have a war going on. That's never a good thing. That's a problem. That's a very high entropy thing. And we would wish that would stop or never start in the first place. But there is some good news as well. And that's from the big picture. When you look at it with a big picture, and it's interesting you asked this because I had a very similar question a couple of days ago on the Fireside Chat. And it was a very similar question. So if you look at the big picture, as you recall, our point here is to evolve. And that evolution is very slow at first, but then gets faster and faster. The more you learn, the more you evolve, the easier it is to evolve more. It's that sort of thing. So it actually accelerates. So it starts out very, very, let me start over here. Starts out very, very low, and then the graph shoots up. In other words, time is on the x-axis and evolution's on the y-axis. So the evolution is not very much, and it's just very slowly growing, but then it grows more quickly. And we, as you've heard me say, are on the knee of that curve. We're right at that point where it's starting to speed up. So now look back, only about 200 years. If you back up about 200 years, you will see that Europe was in the middle of its colonialism period. That's the 1800s, And at that time, going out and attacking some other country because you'd like their resources, subjugating their people to be cheap labor in order to help you get those resources, was seen as a good thing to do. That was there was actually competition between all of the European nations to see what territories they could conquer and own and take over. Basically, using those resources and subjugating the people to be the cheap labor to help them get that. And nobody saw that as a immoral thing or a bad thing. Matter of fact, like most people, when you do something that you want to do, you justify it. And the Europeans justified it as, oh, we're bringing civilization to the savages. When we get there, we're going to build railroads and we're going to introduce technology and all sorts of things that will help leap them ahead. So we're just contributing. We're helping them out, of course, by making them second-class citizens in their own country and abusing them. Anyway, the point is that that's just 200 years ago. Now, our evolution has been going on for about 200,000 years. And for most of that, there's been very little obvious growth. Okay, the basic, most high entropy social system is the warlord system. The tough guy, the big guy's in charge, and he tells everybody else what to do. And he makes up the law, whatever he says is law. And he is, of course, above the law since he can make the law. And that is the kind of the very bottom level social system, the high entropy. And we were in that warlord mentality in our civilizations and in our social systems for most of that 200,000 years. It's only been in the last maybe even 300 or 400 years that we've begun to see that that's not such a great system. And we've been weaning ourselves off of that. So now we go back just 200 years and taking over other countries, taking their stuff and feeling good about it, was a good thing. And I'm not talking little, podunk countries that nobody heard of. I'm talking about most all of Europe, all of the big countries, all of the well-developed countries felt that way. So here we are, 200 years later, an eye blink in our evolution. And guess what? We don't feel that way anymore. The world doesn't feel that way. We look at what's going on there and we say, oh no, how awful. What a wrong thing to do. We see it as obviously high entropy, as wrong, as immoral, as unethical. And that's new. That's good news. We've grown up as a species, as a people. So most of the people in the world now see this thing where Putin and Russia have invaded the Ukraine as a terrible thing, something that was not was not a moral thing to do. It was wrong. Most of us see it that way. And because of that, excuse me, because of that, we're going to see that in time, now whether that's a year or 6 months or a couple of decades, we're going to see that the Soviet Union and Putin will lose credibility, will lose stature, will lose their position in the world. They will come out the other end of this worse off than before they started it, because this is not 1800 anymore. They're on the wrong side of history now. They're on the wrong side of evolution now. So they're on the de-evolution side, not the evolution side. So they will sow the seeds with this war that they're perpetrating on the Ukraine. They will sow the seeds of their own destruction. They will sow the seeds of their own demise, I guess you should say. They're not going to self-destruct as a nation, but they're going to see their own demise, their own lacking of what influence in the world, lacking of respect in the world, because they do this. They'll be kind of a pariah nation, a nation that's still back in the 1800s thinking if somebody else has something you want and you're bigger than they are, well, you just take it away from them. You know, and we don't play by those rules anymore. We've evolved the quality of our consciousness beyond that attitude. Very good news. Just 200 years. That's, like I say, an eye blink in our evolution. So you see, we are evolving. You know, for those people who look and say, oh, look at the war, look at all the, you know, the greed and corruption and so on. How do you think that we're evolving? Well, if you don't have to look back too far to see there's quite a difference in attitudes today. Part of the thing that makes that possible is back in the 1800s, all the people at home didn't have to watch those indigenous people being slaughtered and taken advantage of and so on. That just was in a land far, far away. And they didn't really hear about that because nobody bragged about how, violent they were. So that just wasn't something they had to deal with emotionally. Today, everybody all over the globe can see what's going on, can see the footage as it happens being taken. So now the people back home and everybody else gets to see the meanness, the nastiness, the dysfunction of war. What it's going to end up doing is helping us grow a little faster, because what the Soviet, or not Soviet Union anymore, that's what they're maybe trying to become again, but what Russia and Putin are doing is basically putting themselves up as the best bad example of what not to be and how not to act. And the rest of us in the world are looking at that and growing up a little bit, saying, yeah, I can see that. That is not nice. That's a bad thing to do. You need to respect other people, other countries, not just bully them because you can. So in the long run, we're all going to be a little better off, because this is a learning moment for all of us. But we need to take it seriously, and we need to look at it and see it at a very fundamental level, how immoral and unethical, how wrong it is. That's what needs to stick with us at a very deep level. And we have to not let it make us angry, because once we get angry, then we become part of that problem. We tend to make everything worse. So I think we have another question coming with being angry and how do you deal with things. But in any case, that's the good news. And someday our culture will begin to not accept corporations and organizations that are greedy and abusive. Right now, we accept that. Sure, corporations are greedy. They're all about profit. Their board of directors are sworn by law to maximize profits. That's capitalism. Yay, capitalism. You go team. Profits. That's what that's all about. And we kind of buy into that, and we agree with that as a culture. So we have a lot of very greedy, abusive organizations and corporations because we accept it. Just like in the 1800s, they had a lot of greedy, abusive, countries with military that were going out and conquering other people for their own benefit. Well, one day, we'll not accept that. We'll look at those greedy, abusive corporations and businesses and organizations, and we'll say, that's immoral. That's wrong. That's dysfunctional. It's not a good part of our civilization. And when we have that attitude, just we the people have that attitude, those corporations will begin to disappear. As we begin to get that attitude, they will change. You see? So it's not that you have to have a bigger war and a bigger force to crush the bad guys. All we have to do to change things in this world is just grow up. And you can't force anybody else to grow up, so just grow yourself up. That really is the optimum thing you can do to help the world, is just grow yourself up. And as we people grow up, this negativity just goes away. It's there now because it reflects us. When it doesn't reflect us anymore, it'll go away. So you don't like greedy, abusive businesses and corporations? Well, just outgrow that and say, oh, that is not a good thing. And if enough of us feel that way, they'll go away. We won't have that anymore. Just like now, enough of us think that, declaring war on a country that's a tenth your size just because you can, and you can take it over because they have lithium or other kinds of resources that you'd like to have, well, or you just want the power of having more people and more territory. Whatever the reason is, now most people think that's immoral and wrong. One day we'll think greedy corporations are wrong. So, yay, I think this is a good thing that we're learning from, a good object lesson. So it will have, in the long term, like I say, it could be 6 months or it could be 2 decades, but in the long term, it's going to actually help us grow up.
Tom, what do you think of the sanctions against Russia? So sanctions, the economic sanctions that some may argue probably won't hurt Putin that much, but really affect the everyday Russian citizens. Is that a low entropy response from the other nations, which we know causes a lot of harm to the everyday citizens in Russia?
Yes.
Is that an action of being angry, which we shouldn't be?
No. I think that is a good low entropy choice. That's not a violent choice, okay? It does make the average Russian person's life a lot harder. Indeed, it does. But the Russian government is a reflection of the Russian people. That Russian government only exists because the Russian people allow it to exist, because that's what they accept. Just like in the 1800s, we accepted taking over other countries, and now we accept greedy corporations. They accept that government the way it is. So that's partly, they're the part that feels the squeeze right now. Well, the more they feel that squeeze, the less likely they are to accept that kind of government, because they'll think, well, when you have that kind of government, you end up suffering. We don't want that kind of government. So that's just the natural consequences of the choices you make. Okay, now you might say, well, the Russians didn't have any choice. That government was just forced on them. Well, not necessarily so. They let it be. It represents them. And yes, I think that's the low entropy choice. The sanctions are a way that other people, non-Russians, can express their dismay at the poor behavior, at the high entropy behavior of Putin. So, sure, the country as a whole gets punished. That is, there's not much else you can do about it. If you just sit on the sidelines and say, oh, that's so naughty, shouldn't do that, then that has absolutely no, that's not really objecting. That's still almost just turning and looking the other way and letting it happen and pretend that it isn't really happening. That's not helpful. So we do what we can. No, we're not going to start a war. We're not going to send nukes. We're not going to, even send soldiers. What we're going to do is you do sanctions, send, I guess, munitions and food and aid and medical services, to help the Ukrainians and that sort of thing. And that's a risky business. We're playing very risky business. When these things happen, if it gets to a showdown between two nuclear powers because we're helping their enemy and so on, then, it could end up in a very bad situation. Instead of being, 6 months or a couple of decades until we see the better results. It might be a couple of centuries before we see better results if it goes that bad. So yes, there's risk, but life is risky. It's always risky. And you have to be willing to take those risks and live gracefully with uncertainty. Because just pretending it isn't happening and looking the other way just encourages bad behavior. So you need to be strongly discouraging of the bad behavior. So yes, I think the sanctions are the best low entropy way to proceed.
Thanks so much for answering that question. I know a lot of people in Discord actually has been talking about the Ukraine war. So thank you so much for enlightening us. The next question comes from Merlin, same Merlin from last time. So Merlin asks about sexual desire, lust, and masturbation. Quote, I know this is a difficult subject to discuss, but I think it involves a lot of thought loops for a lot of people, including myself. That can be very difficult to think about in a productive or novel way. Does Tom have a perspective on casual sex, on masturbating instead of having sex, on lust generally? Thank you. Unquote.
Oh, okay. It's not really such a hard subject to talk about. I think we're all adults, and it should be an easy conversation for adults to have. Sexuality comes with having a human avatar. The sexuality isn't with the consciousness, it's with the avatar. It's according to the rule set. The way the avatar evolved, sexuality is part of that avatar. So we should explore and enjoy all aspects of our humanity, including the sexual part. But we should not get obsessed with it. We should not let the sexuality or any other aspect of our humanity get twisted up around our fear, our ego, and our beliefs. When it does, then it causes us problems. So I would say get rid of your fear, get rid of your guilt, and have the courage to be authentic. Being an authentic human means you are sexual. Let that be accepted. It is the way you are. Okay? And if you're not sure whether, the way you are feeling with those sexual feelings, whether they're, good or bad, well, you can always determine whether something's good or bad by assessing its effect on long-term entropy. So think about long-term entropy. In the long term, if you behave this way, does it make the system a lower entropy system or a higher entropy system? How do you affect the general, world, your culture, in the world in general? How does it affect it? Okay, and if you come to the conclusion that there's really no effect or a minor effect or a good effect, then it's probably a good thing. It's probably just fine. If you think, oh, this is creating a bad effect, this is somehow a high entropy thing, then, you're thinking that that's high entropy, then it's something you shouldn't do. So that's a decision you have to make. When you're not sure about your entropy assessment of your choice, take your best guess after due diligence. Now, due diligence is a legal term. It just means you've tried your best to come up with the right answer. It's not just something you take very casually or you don't think about, or it's the first thing that comes across your mind. You think about it. You study it. You're concerned, and you look at it from not only how it's going to affect you, but how it affects other people. So that's the due diligence. And then you learn from the consequences that are generated by your choice. So you look at it and say, well, I can't see how this is really going to have a negative effect on the world. Then you say, okay, then I can participate with that. And then you look at consequences and say, what kind of consequences has that choice delivered to me? If the consequences are terrible, then it was a bad choice. If the consequences are good, it was a good choice. And if the consequences are neutral, then it was an okay choice. You see, so that's the way we look at life. It's not just about sexuality, but that's the way we approach everything in life. All of our choices should be approached that way. Don't be afraid to make a choice. Don't be afraid to be wrong. Do your due diligence. Come to a conclusion. Try it out. See what the consequences are. You can say, well, okay, I tried total abstinence from sex because I thought sex was going to cause a lot of trouble. But I find out that complete abstinence drives me crazy. And now I'm neurotic, and now I'm needy, and now I've got all these other issues and pressures and things, and stuff under the rug, and bad consequences, higher entropy. That's probably not a good choice. You see, it doesn't work out too well. It doesn't play well. It isn't good for my romantic relationships. It just doesn't seem to be a good thing. So then let's try this and then see how that works out. And you just learn from it. So don't be afraid to make a choice and go do it and then see how that works. And if it works well, do more of it. If it works poorly, do less of it. And if it's in between, then it doesn't, the consequences are not serious, I guess. So one note of caution, though. We do not live alone. We're not one person on an island. We live in a culture. Okay? So you need to take some care not to get crosswise with your culture in public. But you need to also be authentic whenever you can without raising system entropy. So what I'm saying with that is that you have to be sensitive to other people. So if you live in a culture, let's say, that is very neurotic about sex, is very, most of their understanding and sexual attitudes are dysfunctional. It's just the way that culture is. Well, then you need to not fly in the face of that culture. So your sexual life then can still be authentic, but you need to not push that in the other people's faces if they disagree with you. So in other words, you have to not flaunt your, your misfit. If you're a misfit with your culture, that means you do or think or feel things that aren't politically correct in your culture. They're not culturally correct. Then you need to be aware of that, and you need to not make other people feel uncomfortable. So you have to take some care about what you do that's crosswise with your culture and do it in a way that minimizes entropy. But so that's just kind of a note, kind of a side thing on this issue. But basically, do what you think is right. Typically, once you get rid of your fear, whatever feels right to you, whatever feels good to you, is right and is good. It's only your fear that creates the problems. Everything about you that's natural, like your sexuality is natural, if you just follow those natural inclinations, you be authentic with yourself, including your sexuality, be authentic with yourself. Once you get rid of your fear, what's natural, what feels good, generally is good. It's only your fear that creates the problems. So look at what you're motivated by. Are you motivated by guilt? Are you motivated by fear? Are you where do your concerns come from? Well, get rid of that fear. So yes, sexuality is a part of being human, and that means all sorts of sexuality. I don't know, I guess we could probably make a long list of the things that are sexual, but all of it is okay as long as you and your partners are okay with it and you don't rub it in the face of your culture if it's crosswise with your culture. Now, if you want to change your culture, well, go do that. Just don't do it by getting angry. Do it by helping educate, by helping inform, by, do it in a low entropy way, not in a high entropy way. So I don't know whether that answered all of it, but I think it does. So if it seems to work for you, then do it. If it doesn't work for you, do something else. Sex is a part of our life. It's a part of who we are. And if you deny who we are, if you try to say, let's say, sex is a bad thing, you should stay away from it. Masturbation is a bad thing, you should never do that. If you get crosswise with your sexuality, you're going to generate fear, generate guilt, and basically create dysfunction. You're going to make yourself neurotic. So don't get crosswise with your instincts. That sexuality you have is instinctual. It comes, with the double X for females and the XY with males. It comes in our genes, comes in our chromosomes. It's just the way we're made. We need to celebrate that, enjoy that. You see, so that's kind of the key. Just stay away from the fear, the guilt. That's the problem.
What is the low entry? Tom, sorry to interrupt you. You mentioned guilt a couple of times, and in your work, you often talk about fear. What is a low entropy way to handle guilt, whether it's related to sex, masturbation, or not?
Well, guilt is just another fear. Guilt is the thing that you have when you think you're doing something that your culture says is wrong, or that your parents say were wrong, or that your community says is wrong, but you do it anyway. That's guilt, where you do things that you think were wrong things to do, but you do them anyway. Well, see, that the guilt comes up a lot in sexuality because we have this problem in that sexuality is part of our instincts. We have pressures, we have forces, we have instinctual needs and desires, and if we try to ignore those or deny those, then it's going to, because we feel guilty, because our culture doesn't approve of something we're doing, sexually. If we try to deny that, all we do is make ourselves neurotic. You have to look at your basic instincts, who you are. And those instincts are centered around survival and procreation. That's what your instincts are focused on, those two things. You have instincts because you need to survive and you need to procreate. So that's, safety and sex, if you like. So that's where our instincts hit us. We have a lot of sexual instincts. If we get crosswise with those instincts, we'll make ourselves neurotic because the body, the instincts are saying, be this way, do this, feel this. And we say, no, no, no. Well, we can say no at a particular instance, and that's no problem. Your instincts don't have to be in charge. You can be in charge of your instincts. It's not that. Anytime you can always say, no, instinct, now is not appropriate. You see, and that's fine. But if you see no instinct, never. That's denial. That's what makes you neurotic. You have to work with those instincts and, enjoy your humanity. I guess the best, I would say, enjoy your humanity, express your humanity, express your instincts, but do it within a context where everybody wins. It gets to be a bad thing when you do it at somebody else's expense, or if you pressure other people to do things that makes them feel guilty or bad. So as long as it's an everybody wins kind of a situation, then it's okay. It's an okay thing to do. It's an okay thing to be. So no, you don't have to be bullied by your instincts, but you have to be responsible, and you have to know when your sexuality is appropriate and when it's not. And, control your behavior that way so as not to overrun other people's free will and other people's sensibilities. But within a situation where you're not overrunning anybody's sensibilities, where everybody is agreeable, then there's almost nothing that is not good. There's nothing that's wrong there, as long as everybody agrees and it's all right. So I have a very broad view in sexuality of what's okay. Everything is okay, as long as everybody's having a good time. If somebody's being bullied or pressured or, put upon or forced, then it's not a good thing. And that's not a good thing, not because it's forcing sexuality on somebody. It's not a good thing because you're forcing anything on somebody. It's the same rules no matter what it is. You're forcing things on other people. It's not good. It's not nice. Trying to push other people and kind of overrun their free will is wrong. That's what Putin's doing. He's forcing himself and overrunning other people's free will. And it's just basically a wrong thing to do. And it's whether it's in politics or whether it's in sexuality, it's that same rule.
I was thinking that exact same thing, Tom, before we move on to the next question, that you had said at the very beginning of your conversation on sexuality that, it is one thing among others about being human that should be fully explored. And there was sort of a normalizing and de-emphasizing of, because sexuality gets sort of polarized. It either gets so much attention, and other ways it also is completely ignored. And really, it's just this part of the human experience that's quite normal. And the formula from the big picture that you're sharing, and I was having the same thought, I'm like, it's not really all that different than other areas of human life and consciousness. Authentic, get rid of fear, care about others. And, some amalgamation of those, and the rest kind of works itself out, and it can be a really diverse expression.
Yeah, exactly. That is correct. And whenever you're unsure of whether or not it's hurting you or others, just do your due diligence, make your best guess, move forward, and see what happens. If weeks later or months later you find that there's more dysfunction, well, then it was probably a very bad choice. Don't do that anymore, you see. So don't be afraid to experiment and learn from the results of your experiments. So if you find a particular sexual behavior that creates dysfunction in your life for whatever reason, well, stop. It's not a good idea. That's, like you say, it's life. It's the same attitudes we have toward life in general, everywhere, that we have toward sexuality. It's not like a special part of our life that takes special, special rules. It's the same rules that fit everywhere else. Exactly.
Awesome. Thank you, Tom. Let's move on to the next question from Dylan. And this will be kind of a nice balance to, sort of the body base. Now we're going more to the intellect, which is kind of interesting. Dylan asks, for those who want to be scientists, do you have any advice for scientists when pursuing a career in science and believing or pursuing the subjective in a scientific career? Thank you.
Yeah, no, there's no conflict. There's no conflict between those two. It's not like if you're a scientist, then you can't pursue subjective, well, if you're an objective scientist, that you can't pursue subjective science. Objective science and subjective science are both science. They're both logical. They both have rules. They both follow patterns. And you should be working both. Open-minded skepticism covers both of them equally. If you're in the subjective world, open-minded skepticism is how you decide. And if you're, in the objective world, open-minded skepticism. So again, one rule covers all here. So you can do both. You should be working toward being fully conscious And what that means is that you have developed your left brain and your right brain. Or, in other words, you've developed your intuitive side and your intellectual side. You need both. But if you only have one of those developed, only have your intellectual side and not the intuitive or vice versa, you're out of balance. There's a part of life and a part of experience that you're missing. You really need to have both, and they both should be well developed. Now, in our culture, most people have a pretty well-developed intellectual side because we work on that from kindergarten on. We learn things, and we have a very immature, a very childish, undeveloped intuitive side. Matter of fact, a lot of people don't even think there is such a thing as intuition. Intuition is an illusion. So people like that are just very out of balance, and they're missing a very huge part of reality, of what is available to them as a consciousness. So, yes, develop both sides fully, as much as you can, and they should be, they should be used together. It's not like you're in, oh, now I'm in intellectual mode, now I'm in intuitive mode. You can do that sometimes because some things are primarily intellectual and some things are primarily intuitive. But for the most part, your life should be in both modes at the same time. Let the intellect do what it does best and let the intuition do what it does best, and let the two of them work together as a team. That's the way you should live your life.
And a quick follow-up from that, Tom, I would wonder for Dylan and maybe others who have an appreciation of that intuitive side and they want to bring that into a scientific sphere, that in many ways the scientific culture is very much stuck in the intellectual side. That's changing a little bit in our culture, but I wonder for someone like Dylan or others who want to be a bridge, so to speak, of both of those worlds, the intellect and the intuition, they're going to be in a culture that doesn't really fully appreciate the intuitive side or know how to incorporate or integrate subjective side. And you have a unique experience of being both, a physicist with, really jobs and contracts and very involved, physics environments. Just a simple way to put it, people that very much think in the left brain mode. And yet here you are also part-time back in the day, working with Bob Monroe, really working a part-time job, essentially exploring consciousness. And so for someone like Dylan or others who are entering that scientific sphere and they really want to be a bridge for both, there's probably some dynamic tension that has potential between authenticity, but also, like you were saying earlier, being in relationship to the culture in an effective way.
Yeah. Well, you can't get too crosswise with your culture. If you are, let's say, develop both right and left brains, so you have a good intuitive development and a good intellectual development, but you're in a culture that is almost entirely left brain, almost entirely logical. Well, you don't push that at people. You don't, again, anger and pushing is never, a good way to communicate with anybody. Then that just is the way you are, and you don't really share that because they're not ready to share that. And it works just the opposite way too. If you are, if you're in an environment where everybody is very right-brained, and you're trying to explain something very logically. Look, don't you see? Because of this, there's that. And because of that, there's this other thing. And therefore, and you're going through that, and the people are looking at you like, what planet are you from? They don't follow that kind of logical process. It's the same way. You don't push it. You say, what's the matter with you people? Are you stupid or something? Can't you see that? You say, that's just arrogance. So you realize if you're in a group that's all very right-brained, that you interact with them the way that makes them comfortable. You interact with people who are very logical in a way that makes them feel comfortable with you. But one thing I will tell Dylan is that if you do develop that intuitive side, it will double or triple your productivity on that intellectual side. So you not only will be good at your science, but you'll be better at your science than most of the people who are only logical, because you will be able to find solutions and ways to solve problems that they can't. Because often in technical work, the way to solve a complex problem is too hard to do logically. There's too many variables. When you have a situation that's got 20 or 30 variables, none of which you can control, how are you going to solve what's going to come out of that? It's pretty well impossible to do that logically. Well, we try to make computer models of things like that, because computers can do things 1,000 different ways, and then you can look at them and come up with the maybe probability of which ways will be better. But we do not like computers. So what do? You see, well, if you have a good intuitive side developed, you can use that, and you can see what the right path is through that problem. And though you won't be able to explain to any of your logical friends exactly how you came up with that, they will realize that you're better at coming up with those kinds of answers than they are. So it's an advantage to be both, to be a whole person with both sides developed, because those technical problems have intuitive solutions as well, where you just get the feeling that, you need to start here, not there, but here. And, I say that from my own experience, in a technical field. What I did as a physicist, particularly in the last 10 or 15 years where I was a consultant, is I solved problems that were too hard for the people to solve themselves. That's why you get a consultant. Otherwise, it's cheaper to get one of your salaried people to do it. It's only when they can't do it that you have to go outside to find expertise that can. And for the last 15 years of my career as a physicist, I worked as a consultant, basically solving problems that were too hard for in-house people to solve. And I had a reputation in my community for doing that. So I had plenty of work because of that reputation. And the reason that I was good at that was because I had an intuitive side that helped tremendously in solving very difficult problems. So it's an advantage. It's an advantage to have both of those. And if you're a very right-brained person and very intuitive, there's an advantage to also having an intellect that can think, linearly and logically. That's important too. So I can't see that having either one strongly without the other is advantageous. So if you're going to mix it up, you're going to be a scientist, I'd say not only is it okay to also work in the subjective realm to improve that intuition, but it's really required. If you want to optimize your effectiveness in the logical world, you need that intuitive connection as well.
Thanks so much, Tom. Our next question comes from Brooke88. And Brooke asks about becoming social in an increasingly digital world. What are your advice for people becoming social? I guess socializing on social media. Any challenges in our world which increasingly rely on technology, social media, internet, things like that?
Well, being social is it's another one of those needs, right? We talk about our instincts and things that help us survive and procreate. Well, one of those instincts is that we like to be around other people because we're not very good at surviving or procreating if we're all by ourselves. We're just not very good at those two things alone. So we need other people in order to survive and procreate. Therefore, we have instincts that make us want to be social. We want to connect. We want to be around other people. We don't want to just live on an island by ourselves. So here we are in a particularly with the COVID that's been going around, in a distance world where most everything is digital. But the digital world can be social. Social media really is social. You are connecting with other people. It's not exactly the same as face-to-face in a physical sense, but it's still connecting with other people. And my advice, if I recommend a way to go about becoming social, I'd say the same advice fits both online and offline. Join or create groups that attract the kind of people you wish to meet. It's just that simple. If you want to get social, you can't be social sitting home alone. You have to get out and have some context by which you meet other people. You just can't walk up to people on the street and say, hey, I'd like to meet you. I'm George. What's your name? That probably won't work. That's not going to be very, very helpful. You have to have a context within which you connect with people. That means there has to be a group, a social thing. So if you really want to connect socially, let's say with other people who are also interested in the nature of reality, or maybe even in MBT, well, then you do something like create a book club, create a group, a discussion group talking about MBT. And then people who are interested, you put that up on the internet, and people from all over the world will join. And you can offer them things. You can take classes, teach each other, interact. It's a social space. If what you want to do is party and go dancing, say, well, you should join a dance group. You'll probably find, not online, dancing online is probably just something that doesn't work out too well, but dancing in real life, find a group that does that. You will find that there will be clubs that do square dancing or social dancing or ballroom dancing, and all you have to do is join. Find them. Look them up. Go take dancing lessons. The dance teacher will tell you all sorts of groups that they know about that support that. So you find the people who have the interests and are the kinds of people that you wish to meet and join that group. So if you're looking for certain kind of, let's put it this way, if you're looking for a certain kind of people that are maybe a little rowdy or a little more extroverted and maybe mostly shallow, well, go to a bar. You'll probably find them there. If you want people who are deeper and more thoughtful and so on, bar's not the right place. You're not probably going to find that there because that's not where those people go. Go find some other place. Join an organization. Join a group. And if there isn't any group, start one. And try to join it in your local area. You'd be surprised. Everybody, all humans have this need to connect with each other. And because we do, there's groups of humans connected to do almost everything you can imagine. All you have to do is search for it and join. And now there's a group of people that you will meet, maybe once a week, maybe once a month, maybe once a quarter, but you'll meet with them and you'll interact with them and you'll make new friends and, you'll go out to dinner with them and you will do other things. That is important that we do that. We need to get out and connect. So join a group that attracts the kind of people you wish to meet, the kind of people that have the interest that you want. And that's how you meet people. If you sit at home and say, I just don't have any way to meet people, well, what would you like to do? Find a group that does that. What you want to do is watch birds. Join a bird watching group. Join the Audubon Society, do whatever. You'll find there's probably a local chapter right in your own hometown. If you want to, whatever, you're a photographer, you'd like to take pictures. There are photography clubs everywhere where people take pictures, share ideas and knacks and filters and, ways of getting that best shot. You can join online or offline. The same advice works both ways, online and offline. But you have to take the steps to go out and join. If you just sit and wait for it to come to you, it'll be a long wait.
Thanks for that, Tom. And before we move on to the next question, it's nice to think about how the larger consciousness system itself is a social system. And what we get to do is explore how we can continue doing what really is our nature, a social system. We are social beings, to do that in a digital context. And I know for myself and others in the MBT community, we found so much connection with other MBT people through Facebook groups, this Discord community that Andy and I are a part of, and where we're getting these questions and all kinds of other like live calls with MBT events, like the global healing meditations. We've been meditating for Ukraine and Russia, both healing for both. And so there's all these kinds of ways that people can be relating. And that includes with MBT. If anyone hasn't heard of those communities and opportunities, we'd love to see people there. But there's all kinds of topics: dancing, bird watching. I mean, it's really that authentic, interest that whatever someone has.
Yeah. The other thing I would like to add to this, if you're going to interact with other people, you can't do that if you don't interact. If you don't share some of yourself. You have to be authentic, and you have to be vulnerable. If you're going to say, I'm going to keep my walls up because I don't want to be vulnerable, I don't want to get hurt, I don't want this and that, I'm afraid of all these things happening. Well, that's your fear. It keeps you locked, behind locked in your castle with the moat up. The drawbridge up. That's not going to help you connect people. You can go and join things, but if you don't really open up and share yourself with people, now, yes, that makes you a little vulnerable. You share yourself with people and somebody might laugh at you, or some maybe do this or that. Well, you have to accept that. Say, that's okay. If it's like that, it's not a big thing. It's about them. If they're that way, then that's the way they are. So it's not just going out and getting in a group, but getting in that group and interacting with those people, sharing yourself, your ideas, your feelings, who you are. And if it turns out that everybody in that group really is antithetical to you and how you are and what you think and your feelings, well, it's the wrong group. Go find a different group where the people are more similar to you so you can share with others and they can share with you. So that's a key. You have to be able to be vulnerable, to open yourself up, to share and give, and let other people be however they are and not take that personally. It just is the way they are. So there's risk involved. Yes, somebody may be rude to you. Yes, somebody may put you down. But that has to be okay. That has to not be a big problem for you. That's fear. So you have to get rid of that fear that keeps you all clammed up in your little castle all alone. So when you do talk to people, share. Tell them what you think. Tell them how you feel. And if they don't like it, that's not the person that you want to get close to. That's a filter. It filters out the people you want to be close to from the ones you don't. And there's some people out there you're just not going to get along with, and they're not going to get along with you. Better to find that out right up front, than have a relationship and find that out 6 months later. That's because both of you are afraid to share what you really think. So put it out there, what you really think. Here's my opinions. Here's what I think. Here's who I am. And the people that say, that's great. Well, that's your crowd. Those are the people to get close. And the people that say, oh, you must be crazy. Well, that's not your crowd. You see? So that's how you find your crowd, is by taking chances, risking, opening up, being exactly who you are, being authentic, and not trying to act in the way that will please the crowd. See, that's not you. So even if those people like your image, it's not you. And you never will be able to get very close, and it'll never be very meaningful. So if you want a meaningful relationship, you have to open up and be vulnerable to somebody putting you down or whatever, saying something negative towards you. You have to allow that to happen. That's how you find out who you'd rather be with and who you'd rather not be with. So don't be afraid. Don't let the fear get in your way.
Courage, right, Tom?
Courage. That's it.
Step out, engage, open up. Yeah. Yeah, thank you. This next one comes from someone's screen name or avatar name that's always tried to fun to pronounce, so I'm going to give it a shot. Anam. I think that's it. Do all reality frames require the IUOC to have some sort of avatar to function as a filter or point of view for the IOC to make sense of the data stream for that particular frame? For instance, when humans die, their consciousness goes to the bardo, to borrow a Buddhist term. What would my avatar be in that reference frame? Is there any relationship between my avatar in PMR and my avatar in the bardo or any other reality frame? Inquiring egos want to know, Tom.
Yes, indeed. Okay. So there's like 3 questions at least in there, so let me do them one at a time. The first one was, let's see, do all reality frames require an IUOC to have some sort of avatar to function as a filter point of view for the IUOC to make sense of, and I would add, to provide context for the data stream for that particular frame? And the answer is yes. Okay, when you're in a virtual reality, your avatar in that virtual reality, okay, is going to be what you need it to be to get out of that interaction, what you need to get out of the interaction. That's what your avatar will be. Now, if you're in an interaction, let's say you're just having a chat with somebody, you're meeting up with some non-physical friend or some other entity, and you're having conversation, then your avatar is irrelevant. Well, if your avatar is irrelevant, then you probably won't even see an avatar. It'll just be your mind and his mind exchanging information. And if you want that person you're talking to, if you can't just talk to information, you have to have something you're talking to, then you'll create an avatar that's suitable for that person you're talking to. Or they will send you data that defines the avatar that they want to present to you. You see, so where you don't need an avatar, you generally won't have one. Where you need an avatar, it'll be the kind of avatar that is useful for that particular virtual reality. Now, having said that, so the answer is yes. You do need to provide context for the data stream. How else can you interpret that data stream if you don't have any context in which it makes sense? So yes. Now, the second part was, consciousness, you die, you go to bardo, which I would call the transition frame, transition reality. That would be my words for it, but it's all the same thing. What would my avatar be in that reference frame? And they say, is there any relationship between my avatar in PMR and my avatar in the bardo? Well, let me change that just a little and say, is there any direct relationship between my avatar in PMR and my avatar in the bardo or in any other reality frame? The answer to that is no. There is no direct relationship between George, who you are in PMR, and who you are in some other reality frame. Now, having said that, there is an indirect relationship. Okay, so the George you, who was in PMR as a body, as a human, is not necessarily exactly the George you that's in the bardo. or in the transition reality. It's a different you. It's not exactly the same. But obviously, there's some relationship there, but not necessarily a direct one-to-one. It's not just the same you. But there is some relationship. There's an indirect relationship because your avatar is whatever it needs to be to make the most productive and efficient sense of any given reality frame. Okay? So your avatar, when you're out of body and you get into different reality frames, your avatar will be what makes sense so that you can understand what it is you're doing, what you're getting. So it's not just, if you get data and you don't know how to interpret it, it's not useful data. You can't use it. So there needs to be context. Okay. Now, if your mind tends to interpret data in terms of PMR, sense data, which it does, that's how our mind works. That's how we interpret data. We see data, we interpret in terms of sense data. Even when we're out of body, we say, I was out of body, and here's what I saw, here's what I heard, here's what I smelled, here's what I tasted. You see, so we take the data we get and we turn it into PMR sense data because that's all we know. We don't know what else to do with it other than that. That's how we define it. Okay? So, because of that, then the context that you need to make sense of your data stream is almost always quasi-physical because you need some sort of quasi-physical data in order for you to interpret it. Because you can't interpret it any other way. Your vocabulary, your thoughts are limited to PMR vocabulary and thoughts. Okay, so that's the connection. So yes, you will interpret it in some way, and it'll probably be quasi-physical because that's your need as a consciousness, as a free will awareness unit. That's your need to have that, or the data won't make any sense to you at all. So when you see things or hear things, you see them quasi-physical. All right, they're not completely physical. There's maybe no gravity and they can fly, and the bird can turn into a sheep, which turns into a human and turns back into a bird again, and things are like that. But that's what I mean by quasi-physical. They don't abide by the same rules as physical reality, but they're sort of physical because otherwise you can't interpret it. And when you get data that you cannot interpret that way, there is no context. You don't have any context for it. It's not a bird or a sheep or anything you've ever heard of or thought of, totally outside of your experience base. You'll have no way to access that because you have no context by which to interpret it. You need the context. So that's, I think, the answer to the inquiring ego wants to know is that, yes, you do need context, and that the context is similar, for the most part, to the physical, just because that's what you need. And if it isn't, you don't even know that you got it because you can't translate it. You can't do anything with it. It's just, what was that? It's beyond your comprehension, beyond your interpretation.
Tom, thanks so much for answering that. Our next question comes from Pete77, and his question is, quote, when making decisions, if your focus is on reducing entropy, how do you know if your choices are coming from the being level or from the intellectual level because you think it's the right choice to make?
Okay. The answer to that is you can never know for sure. There is no sure way that you will tell the difference between whether they're coming from the being level or the intuitive level or whether they're coming out of your intellect. But with more experience, it gets clearer and clearer. So in the beginning, When you have this well-developed intellect and this little underdeveloped, tiny intuitive side, you will never know. Well, actually, you always will never know for sure, but you'll be more clueless in the beginning. As you develop that intuitive side, and as you get rid of your fear, then it will be easier and easier to know the intellect from the intuitive side, and which is where your choice is being made predominantly. And are you just fooling yourself by, I'm doing this because I think I should, or am I doing this because that's what I really want to? You know, one's intellectual, one's intuitive. How do you know the difference between those? I just want to do it. So which is it? Is it because I really want to, or because I think I should? Because I really want to, and I think I should. I'm both of those things. So which one is the driver? Well, in reality, it's probably a little bit of both. Once you develop that intuitive side, it'll be a lot clearer. But never will you know absolutely, without question, probability of one, where things come from and why they come, and what they're for, what you're going to do with them. You never know for sure. Things come, you look at it, you interpret it, you make your low entropy choice, you learn from the consequences. That is what I call learning to live gracefully with uncertainty. There's much in our life that we have to just live gracefully with uncertainty. We don't know. And don't be locked up to where I can't make a decision until I know it's the right one. That will keep you from making any decision at all. If there's a decision point in your life, make a decision, even if you're not sure. Again, due diligence, best choice, and then learn from the consequences. Don't be afraid of the learning from consequences thing. Well, what if I do it wrong? I don't want to learn from consequences that I get slapped or, I get slammed or I find pain. I don't want to do that. Life is like that. That's how we learn. We make our best guess, we do it, and then we learn from it. And if it turns out to hurt, you don't roll into a little ball of self-pity. You say, oops, okay, why did I make that mistake? What led me to think that was the low entropy? And you'll always find that, well, I didn't think about other people. I didn't assess this. I didn't realize that this was going to happen or that was going to happen. Or I was fearful that those things would happen. So I shied away from that choice and did something else instead. You see, and you will learn from it. So don't be reticent to make a choice. Make your choice, learn from it. Have confidence that whether it turns out well or not well, you'll learn from it. And if you learn from it, it's good. See, that bad choice served its purpose if you learn from it. That good choice served its purpose if you learn from it. As long as you're learning, you're doing the right thing. That's the way to look at it. Don't fear negative consequences. Do your best and accept what happens. Courage, right, Nathan? Back to courage. You have to have the courage to move on.
Tom, there's some relationship that feels like it's on sort of the tip of my intellect that I can't really wrap my head around. And so I wonder if you could speak to this topic of making choices from the being level and the earlier theme of authenticity and, like you were just saying now, courage. Like there's some relationship there of like getting in touch with being level and authenticity and courage. Could you speak to something that it might be there?
Yes. And that is that as you get rid of your fear, you have more confidence. Fear erodes your confidence. I'm not sure. What if I'm wrong? If I do it wrong, people will laugh at me. I can't stand that, so therefore I won't do it at all. or I'll do it wrong on purpose, and then if they laugh at me, it'll be okay because I did it wrong on purpose. It doesn't really reflect on me being dysfunctional. I did it on purpose that way. So if you're playing these little games with yourself because you're fearful, then you don't have confidence. If you don't have confidence, then you have a hard time working with your intuitive level, because your intuitive level requires you to have a solid, confident mind that can open, get information, not second guess, oh, is that the right information? Am I doing this right? That's lack of confidence. So to work with your intuitive side, you need to be confident. You see, so being confident gets rid of the noise in your mind, gets rid of the jabber in your mind. Being confident comes with not being fearful. So as you get rid of fear, it's easier for you to learn the intuitive side of your consciousness. If you're very fearful, it's hard because there's this constant noise that your fear makes all the time that keeps you from getting very far. And it's true on the intellectual side too. If you don't have confidence, you're afraid to make intellectual choices because you're afraid they might be wrong because you don't have all the information you need. So being fearful is just dysfunctional, no matter what realm you're in. Getting rid of fear makes it easier to do all of those things. So very fearful people have a very hard time doing paranormal things, and they have even a very hard time doing intellectual things. It just is it's a burden that you carry. This fear is a burden that you carry that's just dysfunctional in all realms. So yeah, there are connections there. To be authentic takes courage. It only takes courage because you have fear. If you didn't have any fear, you really wouldn't need courage. Courage would just be there. You'd be confident. So yes, they're all wrapped up together. That's why what we're all about here is getting rid of fear. That's the key thing. If you can get rid of fear, everything else works better. And the idea is that, well, getting rid of fear is kind of hard, so I'm going to do this other path. I'll leave that fear alone for a while because I don't want to mess with that. That's too scary. So I'm going to work on these other things. And you see, all those other things are really difficult to work now. It's hard to get much traction on those other things. So it's better just to start with the fear and get rid of that fear. Because as long as there's fear, then there's going to be other issues, things that are dysfunctional in your life.
Tom, speaking of fear, we have a question that relates to that, and it comes from Toby. Toby asks, is there any harm caused by thinking of the system, and I think Toby means the LCS, of the system as warm and caring? For example, descriptions like returning to a loving source.
I would say there is no harm at all because, in fact, it's true. So it's a true statement. The LCS is a warm and caring source. Now, to get that, you just have to understand the concept of tough love. What is tough love? What that means is sometimes you have to let people experience the consequences of their choices or they can't learn. That's tough love, letting people experience the consequences of their choices. So if you have a friend and that friend's an alcoholic and you keep lending them money to buy another, cheap bottle of wine, you're called an enabler because you love them and you care about them and they desperately want another drink of wine, then you give them money and then they go get drunk again. You're not helpful to them. You're an enabler to them. And if you'd say, well, if you really loved them, you wouldn't give them any money. You'd let them deal with the consequences and see if they couldn't outgrow the need for that wine. They couldn't get over it. You see, that's called tough love. That's why you punish your children Not because you don't love them, but because that's tough love. You love your children, and you really don't like punishing them. Punish them is like fingernails down a board, you know. It's just not something you like to do. But they need it sometimes. They need that to let them know that it was a serious problem, a very serious problem, as opposed to a not so serious problem. You have to be able to differentiate between those two for them. And punishment is how we differentiate between a not so serious problem and a very serious problem. Children have to have that. So that's tough love. Well, the system does the same with us. You know, I hear people, you know, all the time saying things like, well, if the LCS, you know, must be a tyrant because if it was any good, it couldn't possibly let all these people suffer like this. You say, well, no, those people are suffering because of the consequences of people's choices, not necessarily even their own choices. Like all the people over in the Ukraine, you know, it wasn't their choice that war was started. They're just caught between a rock and a hard place. They just happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. And now their life is miserable, maybe even ended. Well, our experience is like that. Our experience is like that. Yes, that is sad, but it's just the way it is in this big picture. Sometimes your life is very difficult. Sometimes you're just minding your own business, out for a Sunday afternoon drive with your family, and a concrete truck swerves across the line and hits you head on and everybody dies. Should the LCS stop that? No, it's just the way it works. When you're in this virtual reality, things happen. Now, if that was the end of everything, you know, that would be a problem for the system. But it's not a problem for the system because that's only the end of one chapter in a very long book. It's not the end of everything. It just starts another beginning. All right, that one didn't work out too well. Maybe the next one will be better. Well, if you've had 10,000 lives, I'm sure there's been a few hundred of them that just didn't turn out too well. You know, that, you got eaten by the bear rather than ate the bear. You know, that's just the way life is. It's part of being here in that experience. And that's because what happens to us is the result of choices. Our choices and other people's choices. The choices of the guy in a cement truck who stayed up all night doing something or other and then fell asleep at the wheel, or stopped on his way to deliver that concrete and stopped at a bar, you know, and got too much alcohol. Those were poor choices, and they lead to terrible results. Sometimes innocent people get hurt, but they go on. They have another lifetime. Every lifetime doesn't have to be the perfect one where everything works out great for you. Some of them are like that, and some of them are not. So you just have to accept that in the big picture, this is the best learning lab possible, where the system does have tough love. There are hard lessons. Now, maybe for that concrete truck driver is a very tough lesson for him. He killed a couple of people, maybe a whole family, because of his poor decisions. Well, you might say, yeah, that family, got killed and he learns about poor decisions. That's terribly unfair. There really is no fair. There is just what is. It's not fair or not fair. Things happen because people make decisions, and people's decisions affect other people. Every decision we make tends to affect other people. It's just the way it is. You make some decisions that don't affect many people. Oh, I'm going to use a spoon instead of a fork today for this meal. Well, that's a choice, and it doesn't affect anybody except you. But other choices, like I'm going to marry Sally instead of marrying Sue, that affects probably 50 people, maybe more. Maybe affects them all the rest of their life. Parents who have a lot of fear pass those fears on to their children. Do we call those parents bad parents? If we do, then probably 80-90% of all parents are bad parents. It's just the way it is. And we have to deal with the things that happen. Yes.
Tom,
Yes.
Sometimes when I have nightmares, I'm in these horrible places, situations, like I'm being attacked by a bear or being chased by a dinosaur or somebody close to me die. But when I wake up, not only do I know it was a dream, but after a few moments, I don't even remember the nightmares, what they were about anymore. Are you saying that life is just like that? And that's why we shouldn't get so caught up with all the drama?
Yeah, life is...
That when we die, we just realize this is just a dream?
Life is very much like that, Andy. When you die, the life you just got done with passes away just like a dream, disappears, evaporates just like a dream. And then you say, well, okay, what's next? And you go on and do something next. You don't sit around feeling sorry for yourself. Oh, I got run over by a truck. Unfair, woe is me. And I was just really getting it all together. And, you're sitting around feeling sorry for yourself is not productive. So you just forget about it. Just like a dream. It's the same thing. For the first instant or two after death, you remember it all, and then you remember half of it, and then a third of it, and a quarter of it. And before long, it's just a sort of a vague memory, and you don't even think about it anymore. It's gone. And that's it. Then you go on, and when you're ready, you jump in and do it again, all bright-eyed and bushy-tailed and ready to go. You see, it's just the way it works, yes. So all the drama we have here is basically our fear and our ego and our beliefs. They create all the drama. Otherwise, there wouldn't be that much drama in our life. We wouldn't have the oh no's and woe is me's. They just wouldn't exist. So that's our fear that does that. Now, some people get very upset. Does that mean all my loved ones, my children, I'll never see them again? I'll forget about them like a dream and go on to the next thing? Yes, that is true. But that is very effective. It's very efficient. And in a way, you say, well, that's terrible, but it's not terrible because they're all going to do the same too. They're going to die. They're going to forget about it, and they're going to go on. They're not all going to sit around and say, oh, where's Dad? He forgot about us. They're not going to do that. They're going to do the same thing. They're going to move on as well because we evolve more readily with diversity. If all we did was saw the same people over and over again every time, our evolution would start to slow down. If every time you were the same sex, the same race, with the same people, it's just like you're repeating all of your experiences with a little different scenery. Your growth would slow down very much. It's because we have all these new things to deal with that we have to deal with them, not from some kind of learned behavior like you memorize the questions for the test. We have to deal with them right out of our being level as they happen. Everything's fresh. Everything's new. Our choices all come right out of the being level, not out of some, long memory or some kind of learned procedure. We're not like a rat that learns how to get through a maze. And now all we want to be is just in that one maze because we learned it. So, that's it. We just know one maze and put me in that maze again because I'll be brilliant. I'll get through it in no time. That's not on your way to evolving the quality of your consciousness. That's on your way to being stuck in a rut. So the system purposely keeps our choices fresh and invigorating and full of learning potential for us. And yes, it works just like that. The drama we have here is our fear for the most part. But there was one other one. You skipped the part B up here where you collected A and B together of the first question. And the B was, what might a productive approach and response to the global resurgence of fascism over the last several years look like? Right? Okay.
Right.
Yeah,
By Toby, yes.
No, that was by Anonymous. Or maybe it's just a B to 1. But anyway.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, a very simple answer to that is you work to defeat it. Fascism is a very high entropy thing, so it's not a good thing. We don't like that. We don't like totalitarianism. We don't like dictators. We don't like warlords that tell everybody else what to do and how to be and can make the laws as they wish them. So we'd like to take the wind out of this global resurgence of fascism over the last several years as best we can. So work to defeat it. And by that, there's lots of things you can do. If there's organizations that are working to defeat it and counter it, well, send them money or volunteer, become one of the bodies that does that. Be active in politics, discuss with people, talk, write letters, put things on the internet, get online and put your comments and views out there. But do all this without anger. Do all this without shaking a fist and calling people names and that sort of thing. Do it peaceably. Do it from love and caring, not from anguish and depression and anger. So what do you do to fight the global resurgence of fascism? Well, everything you can. It's an important thing to do. But just do it without anger. Feed it, as much as you can. Work in every way you can. That's important.
Do you feel that fascism is rising in the world?
Well, yes and no. This is, I guess, excuse me. Do
you want to take a break and drink some water?
That's an interesting question. And the answer is yes and no. In the big picture, no. In the big picture, like I said earlier, we're growing up. We don't even want to take over countries anymore. The European countries don't really want to do that anymore. And did they pay a price for it? Yes. There's dysfunction that they showed and difficulty and hard feelings and anger and things they created then that are still vibrating with us today. They've created all sorts of problems because of that behavior. And bad behavior tends to create problems. Okay. So we're growing up. So in that sense, no, I don't think we're in the big picture moving toward fascism. But in the smaller picture, the short term, by big picture, I'm talking centuries, over century spans, big time things. Now, over little time spans, over the next decade or the last decade, we have been moving toward more of authoritarian governments around the world. And 20 years before that, we had what did they call it in Czechoslovakia? The Czech Spring or something, and democracies were breaking out all over. We had that kind of resurgence of freedom and democracy like 30 years ago, 40 years ago, and now the authoritarian kinds of governments are coming back. But the reason they're coming back is that we, in the big picture, are leaving that behind, and we're outgrowing them. And they sense that their time is limited, that their window for success is closing. This is not the 1800s anymore. People are changing, expectations are changing, and I think what we're seeing is kind of the last hurrah, the last big push, the last frenzy of activity to hang on as long as they can. And I think that's what you see. And typically when you look at negativity, it's like that. When you are dealing with getting rid of something negative, You push it away, you try to get rid of it, you work it down, and usually just about the time where it realizes its end is near, it just goes bananas. It pushes everything it can push. It just tries to roar up on its hind legs and holler to try to frighten you into backing down. That's its kind of last ditch, last big hurrah that it has before it goes away. And I think that's where we are now. So I think over the past 20 or 30 years, people have realized that the times are changing, that we are starting to outgrow it. And these wannabe fascists are saying, well, I got to make it work now because it's going to get, every year it's getting harder and harder. So they're pushing as hard as they can to get as much as they can, as fast as they can, because time is running against them. Again, they're on the wrong side of history. So yes, we are seeing a resurgence, but it's local, and hopefully it'll be short-lived. Now, it could be unlucky that some really bad thing happens, like this war between Russia and Ukraine, ends up in a nuclear war, between two big nuclear powers. Well, that would set us all back a few centuries, I suspect, maybe even a few millennia. So there's always risk that you might go backwards in a large jump. But so far, if those kind of big bad things don't happen, then we're moving steadily forward at an accelerating pace. And I think the negative side realizes that they are on the wrong side of history and time's running out. So they need to make their biggest and hardest last-ditch efforts to grab as much of the booty as they can grab before they get shut down. So, greed is getting greedier, the grabby are getting grabbier, it's not just in governments becoming more fascist, but corporations and businesses, they tend to get greedier and greedier here in the last 10 or 15 years. But I think it's all part of the same thing. The people who are authoritarian are pushing hard and fast to gain as much ground as possible. And they are in an uphill battle that they're not going to win because we are evolving.
How does someone reconcile that this all is just like a dream when he wakes up or when she wakes up, and then also the fact that the dream is evolving? So it seems like there are two things going on at the same time. If it's really a dream, then how does it evolve? If it evolves, then why do we experience it as a dream?
I'm not sure I got you there. What's the confusion? Okay,
The confusion is like, so remember we talked about how, when we die, we look back and we hardly remember the details anymore because It was just like a dream. But then now we're talking about the evolution of the LCS or the mind. From that perspective, it's not just a dream. There is a evolution
going on. Oh, yes, there's evolution
on.
going on. You see, throughout your lifetime, if you make good choices, you lower your entropy. You become a higher quality consciousness. The next time, when you come for another lifetime, you start at that higher level of consciousness quality. So you always start where the last time left off. So all through that lifetime, you're making great decisions and you're lowering your entropy and increasing your quality of consciousness. So you die. The specifics of that last life fade, but you retain that quality of consciousness that you earned. And now next time you start at a little higher level than you started the last time. So that's how we evolve. That's why it's a growing situation. That's why it's better that we have more diversity and more learning opportunities, and not just get comfortable in a little framework of people we always incarnate with. These are my children and they're always my children. Well, that doesn't make sense. You're going to be dead and they're still going to be here for another 20 or 30 years. And, it just doesn't work out that way. People just don't sit around, waiting for Uncle Fred to die so they can all be united again. That's very inefficient, and it does not make a very effective learning lab. That makes a very ineffective learning lab. And people feel that's a real downer, but it's not really. It's a very positive thing. You start with a higher quality of consciousness if you've made good choices. If you've made bad choices, you start with a lower quality of consciousness. So you start with a higher quality of consciousness, you're probably going to do better because you're starting a little higher level. Not guaranteed, but it's a little easier next time, a little happier, a little less trauma, a little less fear, and totally different. Everything you were last time, you'll be different next time. It's a whole different array of issues and problems and people to deal with and choices to make. And that is the beauty of it, is that we have all of this diversity, all this experience, and each one just adds to the last. That's how we evolve.
A few years ago when I met you at the Monroe Institute, after a talk, I came up to you and I said, you're not afraid to die, aren't you? And you said no. Now I'm hearing you're also not afraid to live, and you are telling people don't be afraid to live because you can learn so much.
Yeah, you have to not be afraid to die and not be afraid to live. You're exactly right. It's that fear that's the problem. So if you have a whole lot of fear, and it's not likely that you're going to learn as much. You're going to learn still. You'll evolve some, but you won't evolve as much. So again, the more you evolve, the easier it is to evolve more. So your evolution tends to accelerate.
Thank you so much, Tom. I hope that you come back to talk to us again, to our Discord
group. This has
group.
been fun. You had very good questions. They were fun. They were pretty well thought out. I enjoyed it.
Thank you so much. To learn more about TimeOut and NIMSA, go to nimsa.me. Join our social media and continue the conversation on TimeOut for Humanity. Let us know what topics you would like us to cover.